I'm a 32-year-old guy, and for as long as I can remember, my family has revolved around my younger sister, Megan, who's 28 now. Megan's always been the golden child, the type of person who somehow makes everything about her and gets away with it. Growing up, it was clear that Megan was the favorite. Our parents showered her with attention, gifts, and excuses whenever she messed up. Meanwhile, I was the one told to be the bigger person and set a good example. For years, I played along to keep the peace. Over the years, I've bailed Megan out more times than I can count. When her car broke down a few years ago, she called me in a panic, and I ended up paying for the repair. I didn't even get a thank you, just an expectation that I'd do it again, if needed. Another time, when she decided to move into a nicer apartment she couldn't really afford, I spent an entire weekend helping her move, and even covered her first month's rent so she wouldn't stress about finances. Then there was the time she ran up her credit card debt and called me crying, asking for a loan. Of course I helped. Every time I told myself it was just one more favor, just one more time, but it was never enough. Recently, Megan announced that she's pregnant with her first child. She's due in a few months, and, naturally, she's decided that she deserves the most extravagant baby shower imaginable. A few weeks ago, she called me out of the blue and told me that I should host her baby shower at my house and pay for everything. Her reasoning? You have a good job and you're single, so it's not like you have anyone else to spend money on. She wasn't asking, she was telling me. This time, I said no. I told her I didn't have the time or resources to plan and pay for a big event like that. Honestly, I thought she'd understand, maybe even appreciate how much I've already done for her. Instead, she immediately started crying, saying I was being selfish and that I should step up for family. Before I could even process what was happening, she hung up on me. Within an hour, my mom called. Megan had already twisted the story, making it sound like I refused to support her during her pregnancy out of pure spite. Mom was furious. She told me Megan was vulnerable and that it was my responsibility as her brother to take care of her. When I tried to explain my side, Mom cut me off, saying Megan was stressed and I needed to be more understanding. My dad chimed in later, echoing the same sentiment. She's pregnant, for God's sake. Can't you just help her out this one time? I held my ground and told them no. I explained that I've helped Megan plenty over the years, and I wasn't going to fund her baby shower. They didn't take it well. Megan must have realized I wasn't budging because the next day she posted a vague status on Facebook about how some people don't care about family, even during the most important times in life. She didn't name names, but it was obvious she was talking about me. Within hours, I started getting messages from extended family members, cousins, aunts, even a couple of distant relatives I haven't spoken to in years, asking why I was being cruel to my pregnant sister. One of them even called me heartless. Frustrated, I reached out to a couple of close friends, who thankfully had my back. They told me I wasn't wrong to say no and warned me that my family would probably turn this into a bigger drama than it already was. They weren't wrong. A few days later, my parents arranged a family meeting at their house. They said it was to clear the air, but it was really an ambush. Megan was already there when I arrived, sitting on the couch with red, puffy eyes, playing the victim. As soon as I walked in, the interrogation began. My mom started listing all the ways Megan needed my support, while my dad looked on, clearly taking her side. Megan sat there quietly at first, letting them fight her battle, but eventually she started sobbing about how hard pregnancy was and how I was abandoning her in her time of need. I stayed calm and explained my reasons again. I brought up the countless times I've helped Megan in the past, reminding them of all the financial and emotional support I've given her over the years. I told them it wasn't fair to expect me to keep bailing her out, especially for something as unnecessary as a baby shower. Instead of understanding, my parents doubled down. Mom said I was being cold and unreasonable, and Megan stormed out of the room, calling me heartless on her way out. My dad shook his head in disappointment and told me he expected better. I left the meeting feeling drained and more frustrated than ever. It was clear that no matter what I said or did, Megan would always be the victim, and I would always be the bad guy. For the first time, I realized I might have to start setting some serious boundaries, not just with Megan, but with my parents too. This wasn't just about a baby shower anymore. This was about years of favoritism, entitlement, and the toll it's taken on my life. Update 1. After the family meeting, things escalated quickly. Megan decided to cut me off entirely. I realized this when I tried to check her social media a day later and saw I'd been blocked. No explanation, no warning, just radio silence. I wasn't surprised, but it still caught me off guard. It didn't end there, though. Megan wasn't just ignoring me, she was making sure everyone else in the family knew her version of the story. It started with a few passive-aggressive posts from her friends and distant relatives. Then cousins and aunts started calling and texting, asking why I had abandoned Megan during her pregnancy. At first, I didn't even know how to respond. The messages ranged from concern to outright accusatory. One of my aunts even left a voicemail saying she couldn't believe I was letting down family when they need you the most. I later found out that Megan had been spreading a story about how I refused to help her during a medical crisis. It was completely fabricated, but by then, the damage was done. Megan didn't stop there. A few days later, she posted a long rant on Facebook about family betrayal. She didn't name me directly, but anyone who knew the situation could connect the dots. She wrote about how she was dealing with so much stress, how she expected her family to be there for her, and how disappointed she was in the selfishness of certain people. It didn't take long for mutual friends and extended family to comment with their sympathy and outrage. Someone even messaged me screenshots of the post, just in case I hadn't seen it. Thanks, I guess. Things took an awkward turn at work. A family friend, who also happens to be a coworker, pulled me aside one morning. She asked if everything was okay with Megan and mentioned she'd seen some of Megan's posts. I played it off, saying it was just family drama and nothing to worry about, but I could tell she was skeptical. It was embarrassing, to say the least, knowing my personal life was being discussed outside of family circles. Meanwhile, my parents were relentless. They called almost every day, urging me to reconsider hosting Megan's baby shower. They brought up how stressed and fragile she was, emphasizing how important it was for her to feel supported. I told them again that I couldn't afford to fund the shower and didn't have the time to organize it. That only seemed to frustrate them more. At one point, my mom hinted that I should figure something out because it was my duty as Megan's brother. My dad even mentioned how Megan was carrying the first grandchild, as if that somehow obligated me to foot the bill. What my parents didn't know was that I'd been dealing with my own financial issues. A few weeks earlier, my car had needed a major repair, and I'd also had a surprise medical bill that ate into my savings. I wasn't in a position to spend hundreds, if not thousands, on a party, but I didn't bother explaining that to them. Based on how things were going, they probably wouldn't have cared anyway. Around this time, Megan posted her baby shower wish list online. It was extravagant, to say the least. Designer baby clothes, high-end nursery furniture, and even a $500 stroller were all on the list. It was clear she expected someone else to cover the cost. When I saw the post, I couldn't help but laugh. It was so typical of her, demanding the best without considering how unrealistic it was. Not everyone in the family was on Megan's side, though. My older brother, who's 35 and lives out of state, called me after hearing about the drama. He'd already been keeping his distance from Megan for similar reasons, and told me he thought her behavior was out of line. He even offered to back me up if our parents gave me too much grief. Having his support meant a lot, especially since he dealt with Megan's entitlement firsthand over the years. My close friends also encouraged me to stand firm. They reminded me that Megan's pattern of manipulation wouldn't stop unless I set boundaries. One of them even suggested I go low contact with my family for a while to avoid the constant guilt trips. I wasn't ready to take that step yet, but it was something I started to consider. Megan wasn't done stirring the pot, though. She told my parents that I was setting a bad example for her unborn child by refusing to support her. She painted herself as a victim again, saying she was just trying to create a better future for her baby. My parents latched onto that narrative and ramped up their guilt trips, bringing up how much I owed Megan for being her big brother. Eventually, I pushed back. I reminded them of all the times I'd helped Megan in the past, from paying for her car repair to covering her rent. I asked them what Megan had ever done for me in return. They didn't have an answer, but that didn't stop them from defending her. The family started to split. Some relatives began siding with me after hearing about Megan's wish list and social media posts. Others stuck by Megan, insisting I was being petty and overreacting. The whole situation felt like a war, with Megan at the center, pulling strings to make herself look like the victim. Then came the ultimatum. Megan declared she wouldn't speak to me again unless I apologized and agreed to fund her baby shower. I couldn't believe it. After everything, she still thought she could dictate how I spent my time and money. It was clear we'd reached a breaking point, but I wasn't about to back down. Update 2. A week after Megan's ultimatum, the drama escalated again. She called our mom, claiming she'd had a health scare at a routine checkup. The story was vague, something about her blood pressure being too high because of all the stress she was under. Mom wasted no time blaming me, saying that my refusal to help with the baby shower had caused Megan unnecessary anxiety. Within hours, the entire family knew about the scare, and I was painted as the villain once again. I wasn't buying it. Megan had a long history of exaggerating situations to get what she wanted. Still, the family ate it up. The texts and calls started pouring in, demanding that I apologize and make things right. At this point, even entertaining the idea felt pointless. My older brother wasn't convinced either. He decided to confront Megan directly. Their conversation didn't go well. Megan accused him of taking my side and ganging up on her during a vulnerable time. She even claimed that our family was turning against her, despite the fact that most of them were firmly in her corner. By the end of it, they weren't speaking either, which only added more tension to the situation. It got worse when Megan created a new family group chat. I wasn't included, but word got back to me through a cousin who felt uncomfortable with what was being said. Megan was using the chat to vent about how unsupported she felt and how selfish I was being. My cousin sent me screenshots of the messages, which included several jabs at me. Megan had written things like, "I guess some people only care about themselves, and it's sad when your own family won't step up." That was the final straw. I left the original family group chats entirely. I figured there was no point staying connected to people who were clearly okay with Megan trashing me behind my back. Of course, this decision caused even more backlash. A few relatives messaged me directly, accusing me of abandoning the family and making the situation worse. I ignored them. Then, I found out my parents knew about the new group chat. Not only had they been watching Megan drag my name through the mud, but they hadn't said a word to defend me. When I confronted them about it, they brushed it off, saying Megan was just venting and that I shouldn't take it personally. That was the moment I realized how deeply rooted their favoritism was. Around this time, I started seeing a therapist. I wasn't handling the constant drama well, and it was affecting my ability to focus at work and enjoy my life outside of family obligations. Therapy gave me a new perspective on the situation. For the first time, I started to understand just how much of my life had been shaped by this toxic dynamic. Meanwhile, my coworkers had become an unexpected source of support. A few of them noticed I'd been stressed and encouraged me to vent whenever I needed to. It was refreshing to have people in my corner who weren't connected to the chaos at home. A few weeks later, my parents invited me to a family dinner. I declined, knowing Megan would use the event to spin the narrative in her favor. Sure enough, she posted about the dinner afterward, saying how sad it was that some people couldn't make time for family. It was clearly aimed at me. The next surprise came from Megan's husband. He reached out to me privately, apologizing for how things had spiraled out of control. He admitted that Megan could be difficult to deal with, and said he didn't agree with how she'd been handling the situation. While it was nice to hear, I didn't see how his support could change anything. Then came the baby shower. Megan ended up hosting it herself, turning it into a public spectacle. She posted dozens of pictures on social media, captioning them with comments about how hard it was to organize everything without help. In one post, she even mentioned how family isn't always there when you need them. The entire event felt like another dig at me, but I ignored it. After the shower, I decided to take a more formal approach to setting boundaries. With help from my therapist, I wrote a letter to my parents explaining why I was stepping back from the family. I laid out all the times I'd helped Megan in the past and how it had taken a toll on me financially and emotionally. I told them I couldn't continue being the scapegoat for her problems. When they received the letter, their response was predictable. They dismissed my concerns, calling me petty and overdramatic. They insisted that Megan needed support and accused me of abandoning my responsibilities as her older brother. It was frustrating, but not surprising. At that point, I knew I couldn't change their minds. For the first time in years, I felt like I was starting to take control of my own life. Even though the family drama wasn't over, I was beginning to see a way forward, one that didn't involve constantly sacrificing my well-being for Megan's endless demands. Update 3. Not long after Megan's baby shower, things reached an entirely new level of absurdity. I received a letter in the mail from a lawyer's office. Megan had apparently decided to threaten legal action against me for emotional distress. According to the letter, my refusal to host her baby shower and the subsequent isolation she endured had caused her undue mental strain. It was so ridiculous I thought it might be a prank at first, but no, this was real. When I showed the letter to my older brother, he laughed out loud. He suggested I let the lawyer know Megan's claims were baseless, which is exactly what I did. I sent back a short, polite response denying her accusations and stating that any further communication should go through my lawyer. I didn't hear back, but the damage had already been done. My parents and several extended family members sided with Megan almost immediately. According to them, I'd pushed her to this point. They couldn't understand why I couldn't just apologize and move on. To make matters worse, Megan decided to escalate things on social media. She posted screenshots of private family group chats, including some out-of-context messages from me, to prove how unsupportive I'd been. The posts caused a stir. Mutual friends and family members started commenting and sharing their opinions. Some supported her, while others reached out to me privately to ask what was going on. Things got even messier when someone forwarded Megan's post to my boss. Thankfully, my workplace didn't take it too seriously, but it still led to an awkward conversation where I had to explain that my sister was spreading personal drama online. It didn't stop there. Megan began contacting mutual friends directly, painting me as the villain. A few of them sided with her, which wasn't surprising given how manipulative she could be. One even sent me a long message asking why I was treating family this way. I didn't bother responding. Then my parents delivered their ultimatum. They called to tell me I needed to publicly apologize to Megan, or I'd be excluded from future family gatherings. They framed it as an opportunity to mend fences and bring the family back together. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were willing to cut me off completely over Megan's tantrum. In therapy, I had a breakthrough. My therapist helped me see that my family had conditioned me for years to prioritize Megan's needs over my own. Every decision I made, every favor I granted, every time I stepped aside to keep the peace, it was all part of a pattern. Realizing this was like a weight being lifted off my shoulders. For the first time, I felt empowered to say no without guilt. With my therapist's help, I drafted a detailed letter to Megan and my parents. In it, I outlined my boundaries clearly: no more financial support, no more guilt trips, and no more enabling Megan's behavior. I also pointed out how their favoritism had hurt me over the years and explained why I was stepping back from the family dynamic. My brother decided to confront our parents directly. He told them that their treatment of me was unfair and that Megan's behavior was out of control. They didn't take it well, but he didn't back down. Knowing he had my back made a huge difference. Meanwhile, Megan continued her baby shower saga. She posted dozens of pictures from the event, tagging every family member who attended. The captions were filled with comments about real family support and being surrounded by love. Of course, I wasn't mentioned or tagged, but the omission was loud and clear. A few days later, Megan sent me a text with photos of the baby shower gifts. The message read something like, "Thanks for being there in spirit." It was pure sarcasm. I didn't respond. Surprisingly, Megan's husband reached out to me again. He admitted he was getting tired of her manipulative tactics and didn't agree with how she was handling the situation. He stopped short of outright condemning her behavior, but it was clear he was frustrated. The cracks in Megan's narrative were starting to show. Some extended family members began reaching out to me, apologizing for jumping to conclusions. They said they'd started noticing inconsistencies in Megan's stories and realized she might not be as innocent as she claimed. At this point, I decided to go low contact with my parents and Megan. I stopped answering their calls and limited my interactions to polite, surface-level exchanges when necessary. I focused on my work, my friends, and my own mental health. Of course, Megan wasn't done. She told my parents I was planning to cut them off completely, which sent them into a panic. They called me repeatedly, begging me to reconsider and accusing me of trying to destroy the family. I didn't engage. It was clear that no matter what I did, they'd always see me as the problem. For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally taking control of my own life. The family drama wasn't over, but I was done letting it control me. Megan could play the victim all she wanted. I wasn't going to play along anymore. Update 4. After stepping back from my family, I started focusing on myself for the first time in years. I spent more time with friends, picked up hobbies I'd let fall by the wayside, and stuck with therapy. Slowly, things began to feel less overwhelming. My therapist helped me see that I wasn't responsible for fixing my family's problems, which was a liberating realization. Meanwhile, my parents tried to reach out. At first, I thought they wanted to mend our relationship, but every conversation quickly turned into a discussion about Megan. They'd ask how I could abandon her and point out how much she was struggling. When I didn't engage, they'd get frustrated, telling me I was being stubborn. It became clear they weren't interested in repairing things with me. They just wanted me back on board to support Megan. Megan, for her part, was struggling to keep her facade intact. She began demanding more help from extended family, assuming they'd step up the same way I had in the past. But many of them had started seeing through her behavior. A few relatives outright refused to help, while others simply distanced themselves. The stories she told to garner sympathy weren't adding up, and people were beginning to notice. The biggest shift came when Megan's husband decided he'd had enough. I heard through the family grapevine that he filed for separation, citing her manipulative behavior and refusal to take accountability as key reasons. This was a turning point. Megan had always relied on her husband to play along with her narrative, so losing his support was a significant blow. What surprised me even more was that Megan's husband started sharing his side of the story with the family. He recounted instances where Megan had twisted the truth, exaggerated conflicts, or outright lied to paint herself as the victim. For the first time, people began to see what I'd been dealing with all along. Some relatives reached out to me privately, apologizing for judging me without knowing the full story. Feeling vindicated, I decided it was time to address the situation on my own terms. I made a simple post on social media, calmly explaining my side of things. I didn't name names or air dirty laundry. I just outlined the events leading up to the fallout and made it clear that I'd done my best to support my family over the years. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Friends and relatives who hadn't been aware of the drama reached out to offer their support. Even a few family members who'd initially taken Megan's side admitted they'd been wrong. As Megan's reputation began to crumble, her behavior became even more erratic. She tried to salvage her image by organizing a family reconciliation dinner, inviting everyone except me. Predictably, she posted about the event afterward, emphasizing how important family unity was and lamenting the missing piece, which was clearly a dig at me. It didn't have the effect she hoped for. Many relatives saw it as another attention-seeking stunt, and a few openly questioned why I hadn't been invited. My parents were starting to feel the strain as well. With Megan's husband out of the picture, they were left to pick up the pieces. Financially, this meant taking on some of her expenses, which quickly became overwhelming. Emotionally, they were stuck dealing with her outbursts and demands, which were no longer offset by her husband's presence. The cracks in their favoritism were beginning to show. One of my cousins, who had been particularly vocal in supporting Megan early on, publicly apologized to me on social media. She admitted she'd been wrong to judge me and acknowledged that Megan's stories hadn't been truthful. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant. Megan, on the other hand, was spiraling. With her finances in disarray, she started asking other family members for money. Most of them refused, having finally seen how her entitlement had contributed to the fallout. This only fueled her frustration, leading to more dramatic posts about being abandoned by those closest to her. Eventually, my parents called me, pleading with me to forgive Megan and offer her some support. They insisted she was struggling and needed her family. When I asked what exactly they expected me to do, they suggested I help her financially or at least be there for her emotionally. I refused. I reminded them that I'd spent years supporting Megan, often at my own expense, and that it was time for her to take responsibility for her own life. They didn't take it well, but I stood my ground. My relationship with my brother grew stronger during this time. He'd also dealt with Megan's antics for years, and we bonded over our shared frustrations with the family dynamic. Having his support made it easier to navigate the ongoing drama. By the end of it all, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in years. Megan's downfall wasn't something I celebrated, but it was a stark reminder of why I needed to set boundaries. I chose to prioritize my peace over the endless cycle of enabling and drama. For the first time, I was living life on my own terms, and it felt like the right decision. Update 5. With Megan and my parents no longer a constant presence in my life, everything started to feel different, lighter. The absence of their drama was noticeable. I threw myself into work and ended up being assigned to lead a major project that had been in the pipeline for months. Without the emotional weight of dealing with family chaos, I excelled. For the first time in years, I felt like I had the energy and focus to give it my all. My boss even commented on how much I'd stepped up, which was a huge confidence boost. Meanwhile, the family continued to splinter. Megan's behavior hadn't changed, and her constant demands were pushing more relatives away. Some of them, who had initially supported her, started keeping their distance after realizing how manipulative she could be. Others, still loyal to her, doubled down, but even their patience seemed to be wearing thin. At one point, Megan tried organizing another family event, but the turnout was noticeably smaller than usual. The cracks in her golden child image were growing. Out of nowhere, Megan reached out to me. She left a voicemail sounding tearful and apologetic. She talked about how isolated she felt, how hard things had been, and how she wanted to make amends. On paper, it might have sounded genuine, but I knew better. Megan had a long history of using apologies as a way to reel people back in, only to go back to her old ways once she got what she wanted. I didn't ignore her, but I also didn't give her what she was looking for. I kept my response short and polite, making it clear that while I wished her well, I wasn't interested in re-entering the toxic cycle. This didn't go over well with my parents. They called me soon after, urging me to forgive Megan and move on for the sake of the family. What surprised me was that they finally acknowledged some of her flaws, her entitlement, her manipulative tendencies, but they still couldn't seem to hold her accountable. Instead, they framed it as something I needed to let go of, as though her behavior was my responsibility to fix. In therapy, I worked through the guilt they were trying to lay on me. My therapist helped me craft a final letter to my parents where I reiterated my boundaries. I explained how their enabling of Megan's behavior had affected me and why I couldn't continue to be a part of that dynamic. I also laid out the consequences of crossing my boundaries, making it clear that manipulation or guilt tripping would result in me cutting off communication entirely. Writing it felt like a huge step toward closure. My brother and I grew closer through all of this. He had also dealt with our parents' favoritism toward Megan, so we bonded over our shared frustrations. We agreed to have each other's backs moving forward, forming a united front against any future family drama. Having his support meant the world to me. It felt like I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. As for Megan, her struggles were catching up to her. With fewer people willing to cater to her demands, she was forced to start taking responsibility for her actions, or at least attempting to. I heard from relatives that she was having a tough time financially, which wasn't surprising given how dependent she had been on others. Still, I couldn't bring myself to feel bad for her. These were the natural consequences of her choices. My friends and chosen family became my main support system during this time. They were the ones who reminded me to celebrate the small victories, like standing firm in my boundaries or making progress in therapy. One of my friends even helped me plan a solo vacation, a milestone I never would have considered before setting boundaries. I ended up going to a quiet beach town for a week, and it was everything I needed. No family drama, no responsibilities, just peace and time to recharge. Of course, not everyone respected my decision to step back. A few family members still tried to guilt trip me, sending messages about how family is everything and how I'd regret distancing myself one day. I didn't engage. At this point, I'd learned that their opinions weren't my responsibility to manage. In one last desperate effort, my parents tried to stage an intervention. They called me saying they wanted to reunite the family and work through everything together. I declined. I told them I appreciated the sentiment, but that I didn't trust it to be a genuine attempt at reconciliation. Based on past experiences, I knew it would just turn into another attempt to pressure me into forgiving Megan without holding her accountable. Looking back, it's hard to believe how much has changed in such a short time. For years, I felt trapped in a cycle of obligation and guilt, constantly bending over backward to keep the peace. Now, I finally feel free to focus on myself, my goals, and the people who truly value and support me. I've learned that it's okay to walk away from toxic relationships, even if those relationships are with family. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I know one thing for certain: I won't let myself get pulled back into that toxic dynamic. My boundaries are set, and I'm committed to maintaining them. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm truly living life on my own terms, and it's a feeling I'm not willing to give up.